Everyone. Welcome to the Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring interesting and timely information to you, supporters of refugees. Whether you're a volunteer, community sponsor, resettlement agency staff, a local advocate, or just someone who's interested in learning more, we hope that you enjoy today's session, Deep Dive, Day of Arrival Core Services. Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly learning sessions, resources and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, practitioners at resettlement agencies, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. As a reminder for everyone joining the call today, there is a control panel in your upper right-hand corner that will allow you to submit questions through the questions box. Please use the questions box as opposed to the chat box. There will be ample time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. Everyone on today's webinar is automatically muted. However, if you have any tech issues, please raise your hand through the control panel or submit a question in the questions box so we can try to assist you. Additionally, the presentation, any resources, and a recording will be sent to everyone following today's webinar. This brings us to our presenter for today. Go ahead to the next slide, please. It's myself. I get to do this every so often. Often I get guest speakers to come and speak about a particular topic, but every once in a while I get to sort of take it on myself and do a sort of deep dive into a particular topic. I'm going to do that this week, and I'm actually going to be doing that next week. This week's I'm going to be diving into the day of arrival. And next week's I'm going to sort of dive into that sort of portion of the time, basically within the first 2 weeks after arrival. So we'll sort of dive into that. Again, my name is Derek Feldman. I am the Senior Community Sponsorship Technical Assistance Associate with Refugee Welcome Collective. Yeah, you can go ahead to the next slide. Thanks. Today's objectives. One, to learn about resettlement core services associated with the day of arrival. That's going to be the first thing. Two, to understand common strategies for collaboration between sponsored groups and agency staff. And then three, to become familiar with other potential wraparound services completed in preparation for arrival. Wraparound services are things that aren't necessarily considered refugee resettlement core services, but they're still important nonetheless. They can be very helpful to newcomers and also can be helpful in terms of sponsors supporting resettlement staff for things that they know is supportive and helpful for clients. But if the sponsor can take some of that responsibility, then the resettlement staff can focus on other things. So that's what we're going to talk about in general, focused on sort of the day of arrival. Let's go to the next slide, please. Also just want to do kind of a quick level set, some sort of give everyone sort of some context and just sort of some agreed upon principles that we're going to be talking about. One of those is I want to emphasize that today you will learn some general principles and some specific examples of those core services in resettlement, but that resettlement happens in a diverse ways within different local contexts. So I just want to be clear that these are sort of general principles, and these are some general examples, but the specifics and logistics of those specific activities and how they are actually done on the ground is very locally dependent and dependent upon working in collaboration with that local resettlement agency, which may have some slight differences and changes, certainly across the country, depending on all kinds of factors like what the housing situation is in one part of the country compared to another, or the particular issues that are related to that individual local context. Always refer to the policies, procedures, and guidance from that partnered agency. So if you're a co-sponsor group or a community sponsor group, you you're partnering with that local resettlement agency, always refer to their particular policies, procedures, and their guidance. Really, they will tell you what they expect and what they want you to do, and so that will, you know, always follow that, as opposed to some general information. Hopefully this general information will be very helpful. You'll see sort of the range of possibilities, but in the end, it will always depend on that local context and working directly with that local resettlement agency. I also just want to focus on the fact that it's very important throughout the whole process to, whenever we're talking about, you know, providing services, that they should be done informed by a significant amount of cultural humility, a recognition that perhaps the, you know, American culture, that many of us, you know, this is the water that we're swimming in, and that we need to recognize that that's not universal for all of humanity, that there are different cultures come, you know, and that people come with a different set of expectations about communication styles, expectations about how people interact with each other, expectations about what we eat and what kinds of furniture and things like that that are appropriate for our homes, those kinds of things. So recognizing that we need to go into this with a sense of cultural humility, also a recognition of power and privilege, a recognition that, you know, we, you know, as potential co-sponsors and community sponsors come at this perhaps with some power and privilege already sort of inherent into our interactions and into the system. For example, the fact that, you know, we have the time and resources to be a volunteer, to work, to be of service to others is a certain amount of privilege to be able to do that. That, you know, because we speak the language fluently and because we're familiar with American culture, we can navigate systems that are much easier for us to navigate than someone who doesn't speak the language, doesn't understand all of the cultural differences, things like that. So there are some inherent power and privileges, things that we need to make sure that we're understanding and that we're being explicit about, and that we're being careful not to just tell people what to do, or, you know, that encourage people to do what we think they should do. We certainly want to educate people about cultural expectations here in the United States when it comes to employment, when it comes to school, expectations of behavior, things like that. Of course, we want to teach and explain and offer information, but we don't want to force, you know, our beliefs or our, you know, these are the decisions that we think you should make. We don't want to do that. We want to recognize people's agency to be able to, they are best suited to make their own decisions for their own lives. Also want to focus on self-sufficiency, the importance of it. Certainly at the beginning of resettlement, this is the most intensive in terms of work and focus, is right in the beginning there. And certainly in the beginning, there will be a lot of times where community sponsors will do something for the client because it needs to be done, and it needs to be done quickly, and needs to be done right away. But we always want to think in terms of moving as quickly as possible in a reasonable way, perhaps not too quickly, but in a reasonable way, always working towards how do we teach the clients that we're working with how to do this for themselves as opposed to just doing it. Of course, it's always going to be easier to like call up a doctor and try to make an appointment because you speak the language and you know how to navigate that system. But it's more important long term to encourage and to teach clients how to do that for themselves, how to ask for an interpreter and then wait for the interpreter and then use the interpreter to then set that appointment and make sure that they understand what time and date that appointment is and set it, put it in their calendar, that kind of thing. Those are important skills that they're going to need throughout their life, and certainly as, you know, as quickly as people can move on to that kind of stuff, the better. So thinking about self-sufficiency throughout the process is extremely important, even in the beginning. So just want to put all of that sort of level set, understanding the context and understanding these general principles. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So obviously, not only are we going to focus on the day of arrival, but obviously there are some things that need to happen sort of pre-arrival, right? That week or two before arrival, sometimes even a little bit longer. The first one is this secure, decent, safe, and sanitary housing. Now, this is a core service. This is one that expands the full kind of diversity and spectrum of possibilities of working with resettlement agencies across the country in different contexts. This is one of those that's really dependent upon the local context, really dependent upon working with that specific local resettlement agency. But some possibilities, so one possibility, honestly, is that the agency itself is going to be responsible for securing decent, safe, and sanitary housing, and that they really, it's too complicated, also because of the housing crisis and things like that, that they've decided that at their location, it's just better to have professional staff that are doing that stuff. Other places absolutely are trying to engage with community sponsors for them to activate and access their own resources to be able to help with this process of securing decent, safe, and sanitary housing. So one of the ways that this can happen is, they're working with an organization, perhaps some religious organizations, some non-religious organizations. They might actually own property. So perhaps a church or another religious organization owns a piece of property that could potentially be utilized for housing. Sometimes universities might have housing that they can, access that resource to provide housing in that way. That obviously is like the one end of the spectrum is where the community sponsor group provides housing. Whether it could be a member of the group, perhaps has an Airbnb that they own, and they're willing to donate, as an in-kind donation, the use of that for 6 months or a year or something like that. And so, of course, that's a great resource, an amazing resource to have put towards this sponsorship. So that's one end of the spectrum, is where the sponsor group might do all of that essentially by themselves. And then there's all the way across the spectrum to doing things like perhaps the resettlement agency itself is going to be doing, the final signing of the lease and making sure that the home is appropriate, that the budget for the rent is appropriate, things like that. But that they might encourage the sponsor group to do some of the legwork of calling around to apartment complexes, calling around to landlords, going to look at properties, seeing whether or not it's really in a good area, it's nice, that it's near public transportation, that it looks safe, that kind of thing. So then it's just kind of people power, right? Utilizing the group's people power of making phone calls and sending emails and going and checking things out, that kind of thing. That can be really helpful. And then taking that information to the resettlement agency, and then the resettlement agency will ultimately vet that possible place and sign the lease and do all that stuff. Another end of that spectrum is where, again, stay there, where the sponsor group may raise funds and pay for a security deposit and maybe the first 3 months rent or something along that line. So, the agency is responsible for all the logistics of that in terms of leases and things like that, but the sponsor group may pay for that in terms of security deposit and rent. So just want to sort of give you the diversity of possibilities, but that's one, a popular one that happens. The next one there is providing furniture and household items. This is a really popular one, and one that lots of sponsor groups can do. They can do it all themselves. You can, they would usually ask for, or the agency would provide a list of household items that are required. That's a certain number of couches per how many people, other seating, how many chairs, a dining room table, dressers, beds, bed frames, mattresses, all of that kind of stuff. So, the agency usually will give that sponsorship group a list of the materials. That sponsor group can, gather donations from the members of their group, or reach out to other people, family, friends, other members of the organization who might not be part of the sponsor group, but might want to, donate a couch or whatever it is. Have storage space, perhaps even rent storage space that might be a cost. Either deliver it themselves if they have people who can maneuver that furniture. Sometimes a community sponsored group might have some volunteers who don't want to actually move big couches and beds and things like that. So perhaps they put some money towards hiring a mover for the day. Once they have all of that stuff, then they can go and deliver it on a day. So that's a popular one, but also one that can be done in collaboration. Sometimes if a group can't find all the items that are required, talk to the local agency, and the local agency usually will find ways to, because they have their own donations, or they might need to use some of those resettlement funds to buy a couch if no one can find a couch or something like that. So and then the third one is sort of day of arrival, sort of pre-arrival stuff, which is just stocking the pantry, essentially getting groceries so that newcomers can prepare their own meals over the course of the week after. And again, obviously you can't do this too far in advance because they're perishable items, but usually the day before, or maybe earlier in the day of, that kind of thing. Someone in the group, or multiple people in the group, can deliver those groceries. And again, something that is culturally appropriate. So yes, going to Kroger or Walmart or Publix or anything like that, but also perhaps utilizing some local stores, an African market, or a halal market or something like that, that might be appropriate for your clients and their cultural background. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. So here really is, that first one is, meeting at the airport. It tends to be the one that a lot of groups want to be a part of. It's kind of fun, honestly. It's pretty special and wonderful to see. People can get creative, and members of the group or other kind of peripheral members of the group can get creative with creating signs and welcome signs. And this is really sort of a heartwarming experience, honestly, but one that you really do need to make sure that you're, working in collaboration with the local agency, especially during COVID, and other times, people might not want a lot of people there. You also need to be respectful of, especially in terms of like taking pictures. Just understand that there's a diversity of experiences and diversity of personalities and things like that. Just speaking personally, some of my own experience, I've had times where I've gone to an airport welcome, and the family did not want pictures taken, didn't want sort of too many people kind of all around and in their face. It's been a long day of traveling and that kind of thing. I've had others who, I got kind of scolded in a sort of fun way. He was, kind of joshing with me that why I wasn't taking more pictures and, posting it on the internet and stuff like that. He really wanted, a more celebratory sort of thing. So again, everyone's a little different, just recognizing that both of those kinds of spectrums are possible. So just go into it with none of your own agendas, just being there to experience it and follow along with what guidance and things like that you're provided with from the agency and or other family members, U.S. ties, or just the clients themselves. But you can be a part of that client's first impression and welcome to their new community. And you can, it's part of sort of doing, there should be an interpreter there, doing some introductions. So this is your first chance to be there and be introduced to the family, be introduced perhaps to U.S. ties, things like that. Go ahead to the next slide. Sometimes this kind of goes together with that sort of welcome at the airport. Sometimes it's kind of lumped into one thing. Sometimes you can think of it sort of separately, but transporting back to their home, their living quarters. And so you can, the co-sponsor groups can potentially provide transportation from the airport to the client's home. Now again, every resettlement agency is a little different. So perhaps you might be at a resettlement agency where they feel like, the staff needs to be part of that process and doing it. Totally fine. You can still be a part of the airport arrival and part of the transportation, even if it's still a staff member actually driving. As a co-sponsor group, you can provide snacks to the family during the drive. You can provide car seats or booster seats to the family, knowing how the ages of the children perhaps. You can provide some basic cultural orientation regarding vehicle safety and the use of seat belts, again, with the help of an interpreter. But you can prepare for these kinds of things and really be a part of it, even if you're not the one driving necessarily. Let's go to the next slide. Somewhat related to that sort of buying groceries, there is, one of the requirements is a hot, culturally appropriate meal when they arrive. And so sponsor groups can contribute to this. They can, if you're adventurous and you're, a good cook and you want to, take some time ahead of time and learn some cooking techniques from the, or recipes from the culture of the clients that are coming. You can do that, absolutely. I've had groups do that, and they actually cook it themselves and provide that hot, culturally appropriate meal upon arrival. If that's, you don't have to do it that way, you don't have to do the full thing and where you're the one cooking, you can contribute financially to the welcome meal, especially, if there are some U.S. ties or other members of the community who want to put on that meal. You can, as a sponsor group, contribute financially to that, whether it's just adding $50 or adding $100 or whatever it is. That's one way to contribute. And then, or sometimes, certainly depending upon what time, if they get in really late at night or something like that, it might be more appropriate to just have a meal delivered. So if there's a restaurant from a similar background in town, you can Uber Eats it, DoorDash it to the client and have it delivered there. So that's another thing that the community sponsor group could do. Go ahead to the next slide. Providing clothes is another core service. And this usually is sort of a combination of the slightly pre-arrival and slightly after arrival. If you are in Detroit or, Minnesota or something like that, and you've got clients that are arriving in the winter, you know that they're going to need some winter clothes of some kind, right? So, if you know that there are 2 adults and 2 teenagers, you might sort of guess some sizes. But sometimes you might want to wait until people arrive to be able to give them more clothes that might be appropriate for work, school, and everyday use. So you might want to wait until you see them and interact with them to know kind of the appropriate sizes. And obviously also, clothes is an expression of fashion and ourselves. So it might be something that you want to wait until the clients are there, and then, you all can go together shopping for some clothes, so that they can have some agency in terms of picking out the kind of clothes that they want. That can be really important too. So anyway, this is an important possible core service that co-sponsors can contribute to. Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, now this one, provide pocket money. Newcomers, refugee arrivals, when they arrive, they do receive pocket money, usually at the airport, but sometimes like once they get home that first day. And this one honestly does have a diverse sort of range of possibilities when it comes to working with a resettlement agency. And honestly, many resettlement agencies don't want sponsors to do this, to provide pocket money. They may prefer, because it's cash, they may prefer to keep that sort of in-house as a staff member to do that, and have clients sign for that cash, the fact that they got it, that kind of thing. But it certainly is possible at some places to provide that pocket money. Sponsors could provide donated funds that could be used for pocket money. So perhaps they could be the ones to give clients that pocket money. They could, as part of the raised, donated funds that go to the agency could then use that funds for, for distributing that pocket money. Or there are some other sort of possibilities, like provide things like wallets and purses to the family to help them carry their money more safely. They could provide sort of, some basic cultural orientation with the help of an interpreter regarding cash and money use in the US, especially with likely purchases that first day or two or really early on. So things like clothes or food or other things that cash might be used for. So, giving sort of an understanding of what, how much does it cost for a lunch? How much does it cost for some groceries for a few days? How much does a jacket cost? How much does a hat cost? These kinds of sort of things, that information can be really helpful for clients to be able to then make their own decisions about how they want to spend their money, and they can realize whether or not this is particularly expensive, or this other thing is a particularly good deal, or whatever it is that they can decide those things. So yeah, let's go on to the next slide. Good. Another one, another core service that's done the day of is that conducting housing and safety orientation. Now, a sponsor group can be the one to do this, but it can also be done obviously by the resettlement agency, or it can be done in some coordination or collaboration between the two. But this is once clients arrive in their home, before you want to kind of give them some time to decompress, to just spend a little time with their family. This has been a pretty intense day, obviously, of traveling, of maybe a couple of different airports and with kids. I mean, you can imagine how sometimes people are extremely tired and just overwhelmed, and eventually just need some time alone for a little bit. But before that, you want to make sure that everyone is safe, and making sure that they understand things like how to turn up or down their thermostat and understand what that does, and how to turn on and off their stove or their oven, how to turn on the hot water for a shower or bath, all of where the smoke detectors are and what that means if it goes off, how to call 911 in an emergency, what those sort of medical emergencies or fire or police, safety things might happen. So making sure that that's what that housing and safety orientation is really about, is just making sure that everyone feels safe now that they're here and that they know how to do things in their home. So even if the sponsor group does that, then great, they can do that. And usually they would have some instructions on how to do that from the local agency. But if the local agency is there, a staff member is there doing that, the sponsorship group can still listen and be a part of that discussion and orientation. The community sponsor group can be aware of those specific housing and safety issues, and help provide reminders or reinforce the implementation of those principles with the family. So where is the fire extinguisher, and where are those smoke detectors, and anything like that. And the community sponsorship group may also provide sort of follow-up and support for any issues of concern. Went through the housing and safety orientation, and whoops, it looks like the lock on the window appears to be broken, right? So then the sponsor group can help with that process, perhaps reaching out to the landlord or something like that, or just following up and making sure that something like that has been fixed, and then report back. So these are some ways in which the sponsor group can be incorporated into that housing and safety orientation as well. Go ahead to the next slide. Oops, Grace, are you able to go to the next slide? Are we stuck? Thank you. Gotcha. Yeah, so I also want to talk a little bit about some other potential wraparound services. So wraparound services are not considered, refugee resettlement core services, but they are important nonetheless, and they absolutely are things that clients need and can be really helpful and supportive to those clients. It can be helpful for a co-sponsored group to take on some responsibilities of these things that can lessen the load a little bit, lighten the load a little bit of the agency staff who might, want to make sure that this stuff is done so that, clients have access to things like, for example, they can provide a cell phone and set up that service. So again, this stuff might be done by the agency, of course, and perhaps they even come with their own cell phone, but they might need eventually to set up service or potentially be given a cell phone as well. Provide a computer and set up Wi-Fi. So these are things that can be done sort of, the day before, a couple of days before. These other services, again, these aren't core services, but they're important nonetheless. Provide cable television and set up cable or something like that, or a dish or satellite. That can be really helpful in terms of, we'll get down at the end there, I'll kind of explain, sort of generally, but I think of it as sort of potentially increasing English skills. I mean, a lot of people learn English, learn, other languages by watching television, really, and just being sort of immersed in it a lot, as well as entertainment, which we all need sometimes, that kind of thing. You can provide emergency information and contacts. So, you can make a list of, who are they, here's 911, here's when you would call 911, what are the emergency sort of circumstances, but also here's the group leader's phone number, cell phone number, here's the caseworker's phone number, that kind of thing. And it can be, put on the refrigerator so that everyone knows, so the client knows if they really in an emergency, if they need to reach out, that here's how they could do that. Sponsors can also do things like label household items in that sort of native language and in English, so perhaps in Arabic or in Swahili or what have you, and also in English. So things like, refrigerator in English and Swahili. The stove, they can put like, a sign. So this can be really helpful in terms of clients picking up the language, seeing a specific item, and items that would likely perhaps come up in conversation, bathroom, kitchen, things like that, light switch, and be able to do that write it out in English and their native language. This can be really helpful as something, again, not a core service, but a service nonetheless that is really helpful to people. The last one, really, I feel strongly about this. I know my colleague Jessica Ashcraft and I talk about this often, is the importance of toys, entertainment, games, and exercise, honestly. So, again, this is like the first day of arrival. You don't want to, overwhelm people with too much information, but you'd be surprised, like, especially with, kids, just a toy or a soccer ball or something, a game, checkers, can be really helpful as you're just trying to kill time a little bit sometimes, especially in that early couple of days. Sometimes it can get a little boring, especially for kids. It's not like they can get to go to school yet and that kind of thing. So, but also for adults, just being able to be outside. Is there a park across the street or something like that you can show them, where you might show them just really quickly, where is it appropriate to just walk around the neighborhood and come back, just so they, so they don't feel like they're just stuck in the house, not being able to do anything, but that they feel comfortable, going around and not getting lost. That can be a really helpful bit of information about that people really need. So let's go ahead to the next slide. yeah, we can move to the Q&A portion today. So give me just a second here. Let's see. Yeah, we're gonna begin sort of answering any questions submitted during today's presentation. And just as a reminder, you can submit questions through that questions panes, through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. So we'll have a little bit of time to discuss and dive into some more things. I will pull this up, but you have the opportunity to add some more questions right now if you have some time. Hold on one second. Yeah. So one person asks, what have people found to be the easiest and most cost-effective way for newcomers to exchange the cash money that they bring with them for dollars? That's a good question. So if they do have their own cash, what are some the easiest and most cost-effective ways for newcomers to exchange that for dollars? There usually is some exchange stuff at airports. That's sometimes one possibility. Maybe some as well at a local bank office, but if anyone wanted to add in the chat or in the questions pane their own experience and their own kind of recommendations for that, please feel free, and we will try to follow up and offer that information when we can. Let's see. Yes, they're asking, will you be forwarding a recording of this presentation? Yes, everyone who has registered for this webinar will receive a follow-up email, which will include a recording of this, as well as some additional information if needed. So thank you for that. Yeah, so the question is, do you have free or inexpensive interpretation or translation resources for volunteers? The one used by our staff is very expensive. There are some, so it's a good question. So one is an app called Tarjimly, which we've kind of offered a sort of lunch and learn session on that, as well as some others. So I will include that in our follow-up email, that lunch and learn that had some translation and interpretation sort of resources and links and things like that. So I'll include that here in the email as a follow-up. But yeah, Tarjimly is one. I know there are a couple of others. And one of the other things, though, to think about, and yeah, obviously, if it's very expensive, perhaps that might not be appropriate for sponsored groups to do. But I do think it's good to encourage sponsorship groups to think about the costs of interpretation, and to for them to raise those funds to be able to utilize those services that they want to utilize. So whether that's making a budget of, I don't know, some $500 or something like that over the course of 3 months or 6 months or something like that. They want to be. The other thing is that with sponsors, they absolutely should and want to utilize an interpreter often, but not all the time. Part of the struggle, part of the learning the language and learning to communicate is that a bit of that struggle to not be able to say things exactly right. I totally understand you don't want to miss information. You want to make sure that that you want to be efficient with your time and things like that. Totally understand that. But there is something to be said about not overly relying on an interpreter for every interaction. That some of the ability to communicate is in that struggle to find ways to communicate and to really try to use English and to try to use other ways of communicating to get things done too. So anyway, just wanted to point that out as well. Let's see. Yeah, is there a rule of thumb as to how many folks we should have at the airport to welcome? Is there too many? I think there absolutely can be too many. That is a good question. That one, I really would rely on the local resettlement agency for some guidance. They have hopefully a better, understanding of the specific context, whether, and I don't know how COVID and COVID restrictions are kind of totally different across the country. But that certainly is something to consider. Just also, a feel for the family. So if they don't have a US tie and there's no way to kind of communicate, with the family ahead of time, I would tend to be a little bit more conservative, not have too many people to overwhelm them, not assume that it's okay to take pictures and things like that. I'd be prepared to take pictures if they're okay with it, but I wouldn't assume that, yes, we can just have 1 million people and everyone taking pictures and everyone with big signs and stuff. But if they do have a US tie that you can talk to, and perhaps they're in communication with that US tie, you certainly can talk about, and they can tell you like, oh yeah, no problem. There's going to be lots of other cousins and other people here. Everyone's going to be taking pictures. There's going to be a ton of people. It's a party. Or they'll tell you like, I'm not sure if they're okay with that, or I don't know. They'll read the signs that if they're saying, I'm not sure, that probably means keep it small and don't overwhelm them with too many people. So I would say if you don't have anyone to communicate and you don't have a lot of guidance, I would tend towards keeping it relatively small. Maybe just the group leader, maybe a 3 to 5 maybe members of the group or something like that, and be prepared not to take pictures. Ask first if you don't know for sure, that kind of thing, and then. But if you do get communication and it's going to be a party and it's no problem at all, bring as many people as want to come and have fun, because sometimes that's how it is. It really is just kind of different for everyone, different cultures, and honestly just different personalities and family experience and just what they want and what they like, just like any other human being, right? We got all kinds of things. Sometimes we are outgoing, sometimes we're more introverted, just how we all are as people. Let's see. Yeah, airport welcome is one thing, going to the home is another. That's a good point. Not all go from the airport to the home. Yeah, it's a great point. Sometimes, obviously an airport is a public place, and it's usually there's enough space for people to be there and that kind of thing. Whereas in a home might be a small apartment. You don't want 20 people all trying to, get into this tiny apartment or something like that. So yeah, absolutely. Plan it out, think it through, talk about it openly with each other, talk about it openly with the agency, and talk potentially with the US tie and that kind of thing, and just be respectful, about trying not to overwhelm people. If you don't know, I would lean towards being a little bit more conservative. So, lean towards being smaller, just the group leader, just 3 people, something like that. But if you know and you want to talk about it and everyone seems like, yeah, it's no problem, it shouldn't be a problem, there's going to be other people there, whatever, then feel free. Let's see. Great. Yeah, I think that's it from what I see in the questions pane. Really appreciate everyone's thoughtful questions and support. Really appreciate everyone being here. I hope this was helpful to you. I want to thank everyone for being here and for attending today's RWC Lunch and Learn. As you see that that QR code will take you to a survey that will ask you questions about today's Lunch and Learn, and also ask you for if you have any ideas for presenters or particular topics that you would like to see. So please take a moment and do that. It's always really helpful for us, so we know what we can do better, and also, you know, what directions people would like and what information people would like to know about. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to view the recording of today's webinar after today. And just wanted to say again, thank you all so much on behalf of Refugee Welcome Collective. Thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.